Why don't we go ahead and get started, and as people join in, I'll let them in from the waiting room. But thank you so much for joining the Dallas 2030 District today for our session on available programs and incentives for commercial real estate facilities. We've actually been doing this. This is an annual session that we do have. It's one of our popular sessions, where we talk about the different available programs from the COG, as well as with Oncor and with the Texas PACE Authority. So we have Bailey from the COG, and she's going to be talking about low to no cost programs available through the COG. And then we're going to have Graham, who's going to talk about the incentives program with Oncor. And he's going to go into a little bit of detail about that. And then he's going to talk about what's different from 2021 to 2022. And then we've got Doug Taylor. He is the COO of the Texas PACE Authority of PACE, and he's going to talk about how to take these programs and incentives and use it with the PACE program. So I'm really excited to get started. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Salima, and I'm the director for the Dallas 2030 District. We were established back in 2014, and we've been going strong ever since. So I'm really excited to have this session. We're actually going to be having another session later next month about the infrastructure bill and how it's going to affect, in a positive way, Texas, Dallas, the city of Dallas, Dallas County, and how possibly buildings and other commercial real estate facilities can benefit from that as well. So I'm really excited to get started here, and why don't we start with Bailey from the COG.
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be on here today. I'll be going over a lot of information, some of it a little bit more technical, some of them a little bit more high level. And so if there's any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. If we have time at the end, I want to be respectful over all the other speakers, so we could definitely come back to some longer questions, or we can cover it via email after. Next slide. So to go over kind of who we are, the Council of Governments is the regional planning agency for North Texas. We cover 16 counties across North Texas. We do not have any jurisdictional bounds, so we can't make any laws or rules or anything. Our main role is to work with local governments themselves in order to make initiatives move forward. With that, we are also the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and through our Regional Transportation Council, we are the Transportation Policy Board for the 12-county MPO region. And so essentially this means that within that 16 county COG region, 12 of those counties are designated by the federal government to receive kind of that urbanized federal transportation funding. And through our RTC, which has local governments representatives throughout it, they vote to make sure that we're on the same page on where and what funding is going where for different transportation related projects. In addition to that, we are also the local Clean Cities Coalition, which we call the Dallas-Fort Worth Clean Cities Coalition. It is one of over 100 Department of Energy Clean Cities coalitions across the country, with the main point in trying to reduce transportation related emissions. Next slide. Within my role, I'm actually an air quality transportation planner. And so we are doing a lot of efforts to try to reduce harmful air quality emissions across the region. We do a lot of different work with this. We are designated by the EPA as non-attainment for the pollutant ozone, which I'll go over a little bit more in detail in the next couple slides. But there's a couple regional concerns with air quality. And so we have some different task forces that are trying to deal with greenhouse gas inventories, as well as different local governments and stakeholders that are together through our Regional Integration of Sustainability Efforts, our RISE coalition, in which basically it's getting everyone together to try to make sure that we're on the same page and working together to try to make sure we're not reinventing the wheel, and people can work as a larger cohort to try to see larger scale benefits across the region. But for those who are unaware of different air quality just standards and details and kind of more of what we do in an easier to digest form, we do produce an air quality handbook that is available electronically online. It's free. You can see it online. You can print it, do whatever. We also have them printed copies. If you want copies of that, we can send those out. But essentially, it just goes over this in a little bit more detail and allows people to distribute that for other people to be understanding of the resource. Next slide. So our pollutant ozone, we are in non-attainment for that. And the ozone pollutant is actually caused, doesn't come from a tailpipe, doesn't come from a factory. It's caused when the pollutants, volatile organic compounds, VOCs, as well as nitrogen oxides, NOx, interact with the sun. And that inadvertently creates the pollutant ozone. So we are in non-attainment. We're failing that standard in North Texas. This is a breakdown of all the nitrogen oxides for our region. You could see the majority of that is from the transportation sector, from either off-road mobile, non-road mobile, or on-road mobile. That's by far over 50% of our pollutants, which is why our air quality team is located within the transportation sector, because so many emissions from vehicles are creating that excess in ozone levels. Next slide. We have been failing the ozone standard for quite some time, but that does not mean that we're not doing anything. It is a standard that continues to get more stringent and more stringent, which is great. It is an ever-chasing target, which allows us to create more and more creative solutions to try to keep on meeting it. You could see that we have made a lot of strides since the bottom axis shows 1999 to the 2019 to 2021 3-year period as of latest. We have kind of stagnated in the last few years. We're trying to figure some of that out. We are still trying to reach that 2015 standard. However, that's even more reason why we're trying to implement a little bit more creative strategies in order to see this downward trend continue. Next slide. Here we go. And why we're talking about this in regards to energy efficiency, transportation is a major part of the energy economy. You can see within this graph that orange is the transportation elements. You can see it's a little bit more than a big component of total energy consumption across the world and then across the US. This specific graph is going over the US total energy consumption. And so while electrification of vehicles is becoming a thing, this graph is becoming even more blurred with where those lines are. Was it commercial, residential, transportation? It is becoming more blurred because electrification of vehicles is going to kind of break that kind of boundary, and EV charging stations may be in a building. It might be impacting the energy associated with that, but reducing the energy related to that transportation sector. And so it is kind of a give and take type of thing. One sector may be increasing while it's decreasing a significantly greater portion within the other sector. So we're just trying to take it in as a holistic approach, and why we're associating it, and how the commercial real estate industry can make a big effort within it. Next slide. The national EV trends and regional EV trends are growing very fast. It's something that you see in the news, especially as of late with the new administration. Electric vehicles are happening and they're growing very fast. Within our region, as of December 2021, there was 37,000 electric vehicles region-wide within North Texas. Over 7,000 of those are within the city of Dallas. And over the last 6 years, we've seen over a 49% average annual growth of EV registration. That is, every single year, we're basically seeing it increase by 50%. And so it is growing very fast. Even now, I just checked the numbers yesterday, and from December to today, we're already at over 40,000 EVs within the region. And so it is growing at a very fast rate, and we can anticipate that to continue to grow even faster as more and more electric vehicle models come on the market. From a trend over the last 4 years, EV fleet has doubled in the past 4 years in our country. And then they are anticipated to they were less than 5% of all new car sales in the third quarter of 2021, which is not that much, but they are anticipating that that could increase by up to 20 to 30% of all new car sales by 2025. And so that's less than 3 years away now. And so you can see that jump is significant, and we're trying to do our best to try to get ready for the infrastructure needs associated with those vehicle trends. Next slide. This is a very pretty graph, a lot of information on it, but it basically is showing how we're not just associating this goal and this transition ourselves through the government. A lot of auto manufacturers are also kind of doubling down and investing in electrification. You could see either people have made carbon neutrality goals, or if they've made fleet electrification goals for their entire vehicle fleet over a certain period of time, mostly geared toward 2030, 2040, but you can see a lot of them have also carbon neutrality goals by 2050. So we are basically reading the market and anticipating this growth. Next slide. The city of Dallas has also made major strides in jumping in on the electrification goal trend within their Dallas Comprehensive Environmental and Climate Action Plan, their CECAP plan that they passed in 2020. They have their transportation goal as goal number 3, and they basically have the goal for Dallas communities to have access to sustainable, affordable transportation options. Within this, they put a target for having at least 1,500 public outlets for electric vehicles to support up to 39,000 vehicles by 2030. Currently, the city has 176 stations with 380 outlets and 3,400 EVs as of August 2021. You could see at that December 2021, that was up to 7,000. And so by 2030, needing over 1,100 additional outlets by that time. And so just to note, this is not city-owned outlets. This is just accessible to the public charging outlets. Each charging station does allow the capacity to have more than one outlet, more than one plug within that. So please keep that in mind when you're thinking of numbers. Next slide. So when you talk about infrastructure, EV charging, there is different levels of infrastructure, and a lot of them have different uses for different functions. Level 1, you don't see that in the public as much because it is much slower. This is simply comparable to just plugging into a normal outlet at home. You get 2 to 5 miles per hour of charge. It's very cheap, but if you have a vehicle that's going to be there for 8+ hours, there's no need to pay that surplus of the extra money that would cost to get a faster charger in there. So if a vehicle is going to be there for a really, really long time, level 1 is plenty sufficient. Level 2 is where you see the majority of publicly available chargers. It's where you see them at the Whole Foods, grocery stores. Most of public chargers are level 2. That's at 220 volts. You get 10 to 20 miles of hour per charge. It's a little bit more affordable, and you need that for 2 to 3 hours, 4 hours, basically up to 6 hours. It's plenty of time to recharge a vehicle in full. And then you have that final charging level, which is the DC fast charger, that direct current. This is really for on-the-go charging. It's significantly greater power pull at 480 volts. And then you get that lot faster charge from that. You get 180 to 240 miles an hour per charge. But with that, it's significantly more expensive to install. So the faster doesn't necessarily mean better. There is a use, there's a time for it. If a vehicle is going to have a quick turnaround, it's worth that money and investment. If it's going to be there for a little bit longer, no need to pull that power. Next slide. This is this current map of where EVs are registered within the city of Dallas. You can see it does have socioeconomic mimicry within where they are currently registered. And then you can see those dots overlaying it are where the current available public infrastructure is. So they are clustered near the central business district where many EVs are, higher density there. There's 176 publicly available plugs or stations within the city boundary. And so it's our job as the planning agency to try to make sure that as infrastructure grows, as EV trends grow, we're trying to make sure that there's more equitable distribution of chargers and increasing accessibility in general. Next slide. There's many things that employers or facilities can do for transportation. You could allow for, in your parking garages, preferential parking for green vehicles. This is a very easy way and free way for your facility to allow a benefit for basically promoting electrification or greener vehicles. It allows these people, if they make the choice, to have that benefit of having better parking, and allows your facility to make that benefit and kind of promote that green, more sustainable option without having the cost of putting in a charger. You can also go further and put workplace charging for electric vehicles. This is not necessarily considered public because it can be behind a fence, it can be behind within a private parking garage, but it allows people at that workplace that have an electric vehicle to know that while they're at work, while their car is stagnant for 8 to 10 hours a day when they're at work, that it could be fully charging. And so this allows for people that don't have a charger at home within their home to be able to still access a charger of their EV, or just basically be using that kind of downtime to make their car fully charged. Next slide. There's many benefits of workplace as well as the multifamily charging. You could see that pyramid here. It does show the bottom of the pyramid. That's the majority of charging stations we need is going to be residential, and then followed by workplace. And then the smaller portion is going to be publicly available chargers that you see out. And then the final kind of smaller bit is those people that just need to top off when they're doing long distance travel, really fast charge. From the employer's perspective, it can help attract current and prospective employees and tenants. It can differentiate your company and property. It can help publicize sustainability goals, as well as it can help earn points towards LEED accreditation. And then from the employer tenant perspective, it can help relieve range anxiety. If you are afraid, if you have a really long commute or you're low on battery, you know that you have the ability to charge when you're at your home or through your multifamily property or at your workplace. It can decrease climate control load on battery while plugged in. Basically, you can start your car while it's plugged in. It can heat up, it could cool down, and then it's not depleting that battery to get that to get the temperature controlled and taking that load on the battery. And then it can also just increase flexibility and just in general for people. The Department of Energy does state that an individual who has access to EV charging at work is 20 times more likely to buy an electric vehicle. So it is kind of like you see it, you see the accessibility, so you're more likely to buy it. Next slide. This past year, the COG did an analysis for the city of Dallas based on the accessibility, focusing on multifamily properties within the city of Dallas and their accessibility to public charging stations. And so within this, a multifamily property within the city of Dallas, only 54% of them are without nearby charging. And we classify nearby charging as within a half a mile. And then when you consider that within environmental justice areas, so that is an area that has higher percentage of minority groups or a higher percentage of lower income people, that actually jumps to 67% of those properties do not have any access to publicly available chargers. So with this information, we want to make sure that multifamily properties, even if private, you are trying to ensure that there's investments for publicly accessible infrastructure so your tenants can use it and other property tenants can use it within the area, and you could get charging moving forward for those tenants in general. Next slide. And then conversely, we did another analysis within that where rather than just saying you have a charger within the half a mile, we did more of a actual density analysis and actual accessibility. How many plugs are available? And so this is something to take into consideration, because simply having access and proximity to a charger doesn't necessarily equate to accessibility. If your building has one charger, that is fine, but how many tenants does your building have? How many people, if they possibly go and get an electric vehicle, actually might have to use that charger? And so what is the true accessibility? So taking into account how many plugs are actually accessible for how many people might need to use it. And so keep that into consideration as you're trying to plan out new charging stations, or seeing how many charging stations are around you to see if your building or property is actually suitable for the needs of people buying electric vehicles. And so across the city of Dallas, per 10,000 multifamily units, there's approximately 12.4 plugs available per every 10,000 units. So that's if everyone in those units, multifamily units, gets a charger, that's going to be kind of a fight to see who can use it at what time. Next slide. For electric vehicles, there is current funding available. There's the classic plug-in electric vehicle drive credit that's been around from the federal government. It is phased out by manufacturer market sales. So certain different OEMs and auto manufacturers that have already met their maximum demand, they don't have any part of this. This might be something that's phasing out within the next year. They might be bringing that back for some auto manufacturers, but as of right now, it's still standard. But then the state, in addition to that, has their light duty motor vehicle purchase or lease incentive program. In classic TERP fashion, it is a mouthful, but basically you can get up to $2,500 off a light duty hydrogen or electric vehicle through the state, and that is available through January 7th, 2023. These two can be piggybacked on to each other, so we do encourage that. Next slide. The bipartisan infrastructure law, which Salima mentioned you guys will be going over in a new session in more detail, just very quickly, and how it relates to electrification of vehicles. It does state it will invest $7.5 billion to build out the first ever national network of EV chargers in the US. It will provide funding for the deployment of chargers along highway corridors to facilitate long distance travel with those DC fast chargers, as well as within communities to provide convenient charging where people live, work, and shop. Within this, there's two different allocations of funds. One of them is $2.5 billion for alternative fuel funding. This does encompass more than just electric vehicles, but a lot of it is focused on electric vehicles. It's spread out over multiple fiscal years. This one in particular, this 2.5 billion, is separated out by two different categories. 50% of it will be used for electrification corridors, which are like those highway corridors connecting different cities and regions. And then 50% of it will be for communities. So within cities, within regions, trying to fill in that gap. This will be competitive funding, so it will be people can apply for it. However, it's only state, local governments, MPOs, which is the COG, and then transit, Port Authority, and tribal. And so within this, it has to be applied for a local government, but they can partner with private entities if they have publicly available garages or publicly available sites, publicly accessible sites, I should say. The second portion, which is the majority of it, is that $5 billion. That's for EV corridors. They're doing $1 billion a year for the next 4 fiscal years. And with that, every state is required to submit an electrification plan to the DOT in order to basically plan out where they plan to put all this infrastructure and funding that they're getting. This one's not competitive. People can't apply for it, but it'll be distributed and planned by the state. Next slide. Another thing that you could do to help reduce employee trip reduction measures, because one thing is trying to make sure that your employees have electric vehicles, lower emission vehicles, etc. Another thing to help emissions is just to have simply reduce the amount of trips that an employee is taking. And so Try Parking It is a little system that you can go and log in individually or through an organization, and basically helps reduce single occupancy vehicle trips. It helps people connect for carpooling, etc. And then you also get incentives for doing greener options and reducing trip mileage. And so you can get gift cards, things like that, as you log it within the system. It is free to participate within that, so we do encourage you to do that. And then as well as you can work with DART or whatever transit agency is near your property and try to help provide free transit passes to employees. That could help incentivize employees to use more public transit and reduce their amount of vehicle trips that they're making. Next slide. And then finally, we have an Air North Texas awareness campaign that does encourage North Texans to make clean air choices. It is composed of regional organizations committed to improving air in North Texas, and it aims to generate a consistent region-wide brand that promotes behavioral and lifestyle changes that impacts our health and environment. It offers North Texans, including businesses, governments, and individuals, resources related to improving air quality. One of its biggest things within North Texas is the little armadillo. It's a little cartoon armadillo that has its back changes colors based upon the current air quality ozone level for the day. And so you might see that on billboards, you might see that on the news. They have that within the weather where they're giving air quality updates. If it's green, it's good air quality that day and you're good to go. Yellow or orange people with asthma, people with chronic illnesses, or the elderly may have issues, and so they should limit their exposure to outside. And so it's just basically making people more aware of active air quality issues as they arise, as well as resources and what they can do to help mitigate that. Next slide. And so that's all we had today. We work on a plethora more of air quality things within our team. This was a very quick, brief overview. And so if there's anything that you guys want any more information on or to delve deeper on, we'd be happy, especially with that, the Dallas accessibility of multifamily properties for charging analysis. We'd be happy to give more information on that and what we did in relation to that study. And so just let me know, but thank you for having me here and look forward to working with you all more in the future.
Thank you so much, Bailey, for all of that wonderful information. We do appreciate it. And again, if you can hold all your questions till the end of the session, you know, Bailey, Graham, and Dub will be able to get those answered for you. We're going to go ahead and start with Oncor. And here we go.
Thanks. I'm Graham Thurman, and I work in the energy efficiency group at Oncor, and I manage the commercial inspection process for commercial projects. And so this will be a condensed version of what we presented in mid-December at our kickoff meeting. So if you want more detail on this, I'll have program manager contact information on my last slide. And also I'll have the site for our Oncor EEPM where we house a lot of this. And it also has the full version of our kickoff meeting that we did in mid-December. So right now I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. And these are some of the new things we're offering this year. This year, all air conditioning, whether it's an air conditioner or a heat pump, will now go through our midstream program. And that works with the distributors to help just to ensure that we feel like we can catch more of our customers by using this program. And so we've got an implementer. ICF is the implementer. The account manager's name and information is at the bottom of the page here. The Oncor program manager who runs this is Ron Hoskovic, and his information will be at the on my last slide if you want more information. But chillers and VRF and stuff, and those that, as you see in the top up here, those still will go through our commercial standard offer program. But air conditioners and heat pumps and PTAC units will now go through this midstream program. And so we're excited about that. We think we'll be able to, have a lot more customers participate. And you go to the next slide now. And so we also have, this is a new program, the Energy Concierge, Strategic Energy Management. Matt Taylor is the program manager for Oncor who's going to run this. And Leidos is the company that we've chosen to implement the program. And so as you can see, it's depending on the size of your facility, you're eligible for certain grants and then incentives depending on what they identify. And so this will let you team up with them to come through and identify opportunities for you to save energy and have a little bit of it funded. So for more information on that, Matt Taylor is the program manager, and his information will be on my last slide. Next slide, please. And so then these are some new measures beyond what we've always offered, lighting, kitchen measures, cooling, motors. And so now this year we'll be offering CRE units. Usually you see those in data centers. We now have baselines to pay on those. Energy Star ice makers and pool pumps, commercial pool pumps, vending machine controls, guest room occupancy that sets the temperature back when the room's not occupied. And then for restaurants, demand control ventilation. So each one has certain rules and stipulations, but if you're interested in something like that, please contact our program managers and we can help try and figure out how that fits into our program and what would be required. Now, next slide. And next one. Yeah, so now this will be just the presentation you may have seen before. These are some of just the highlights of our commercial standard offer program. So last year we had about almost 200 people participate, and we paid out $7.7 million. And next slide. This year, oh, I'm sorry, and so we did about 325 projects. Looks like the average project size was about $23,000, with the largest being $413,000. I'd say probably 85% of what we do is lighting. Actually, maybe less than that. It's like about 75% lighting, and then we have HVAC, and then we have VFDs are starting to get more popular. So people that are putting VFD on their air handling unit motors, as well as in data centers and just controlling motors. There's a lot of energy savings in that. So we are starting to see a lot more of those projects. Next slide, please. And so this year, our budget's going to be similar. It's going to be $7 million. We have about 2.8 that rolled over from last year that didn't complete last year. So that, that's already reserved in our program for this year. And that's common. We usually have about 1.5 to 2 million that rolls over. And okay, next slide, please. And so we have, the bulk of our projects are retrofit, and that requires a pre-inspection and then a post-inspection before we make the payment. Pre-inspection has got to be done before you remove any equipment or disconnect any equipment. And we recommend, you'll need to hire a service provider most likely. And we recommend that service provider is, someone who's the expert on your project. And so typically, in my opinion, that's the contractor. Usually whoever you're using to do your lighting or to do what, your motor upgrade or whatever, they're going to probably be the expert on, what you have and what they're installing. And so that's typically who we like to see sign up as the service provider. We have a lot of existing service providers. I believe I said 198 from last year. So you always can look at our list of providers and see if you want to use one of them. But if you have somebody that you're using or that sold you the job, they're always welcome to sign up as long as they can meet our insurance requirements. And we can, call and help them understand what they'll need to do and how to be successful in our program. As always, I'd recommend, the earlier the possible, the better. So, if you call us weeks or months in advance, that's the best way to do it and be successful. People that call us 3 days before they're going to start their project, that's usually something that doesn't turn out too well, because there has to be an audit done, and there has to be certain documentation and signed documents entered in our system before we can come out and do a pre-inspection and agree on what's there. And so often that delays the project start. Next slide, please. And so this is just sort of the process for how it works. Some of the signed documents and what's required by the service provider, and sort of the path it follows in order to get set up as a provider. So this would probably be something more for, if you have a specific project, this would be more for your contractor to show your contractor and make sure they, want to follow this process and get signed up if they're not already one of our providers. And a lot of times I think the best way to do it is if you've got capturing our incentives in mind in your project, put that in your bid, specify that in your bid that you want to get the Oncor incentives, and you want that to help pay for your project. And that way it's known by whoever wins the bid, that they're going to need to do this. And, maybe they're already one of our providers, or maybe they're going to need to be, but that's something to definitely discuss before, you award the bid to someone, that they've got a little bit of extra work to get you the incentives through our program. Next slide, please. And so this is just the project life cycle, the initial application, and then, all the way through the savings report when we make the payment. And so as you can see, there's a pre-inspection that's required, and then the post-inspection, obviously. And again, for the pre-inspection, do not start removing equipment or disconnecting anything until we have our pre-inspection and agree on what's there. Next slide. And so we get evaluated by a third-party evaluator that the Public Utility Commission has hired. And so they basically inspect us as we do inspections on the service provider of your project. And so that's why we're asking for what we asked for, and asking for the certain rules and documentation that we need. It's all because then we have to turn that over if the project's selected for audit. And they have to be able to determine that we followed the approved calculations and paid the correct amount according to those calculations. Next slide, please. And so that's the website that we, the eepmoncor.com. That's where all of our documentation is housed. That's where a recording of our kickoff presentation from December is, and a lot of other resources for the different measures and how to get signed up and help guides and stuff like that. So I'd encourage you to look at that or contact one of the program managers that'll be listed on my last slide if you've got questions or if you've got a specific project. Next slide, please. And so these are just some tips as far as we've tried to make it easier for the inspection process. Used to, we had to get all our photos on site the day of the inspection. And so you or your service provider was required to have a ladder or lift or tools to open up the fixtures so we could determine, what lights were there or what equipment you have. And it slowed the inspections down. And so we're still going to do an on-site inspection on most projects, but we want you guys to submit, pre-photos, especially on your lighting, ahead of time so we can review them. And if you've done a good enough job documenting the fixture types and the lamps, and we can clearly see that that's what you have going on for your lighting job or other specific equipment, it makes the inspection a lot easier, because then we can come out and we can do counts and look at other things that we need to look at to verify, and we don't have to be opening up fixtures and trying to figure out what you have, because instead you've already submitted the good pictures to us. So I think that's really helped, and I think most people would agree that it's made the inspection process easier. Next slide. And so for post inspections, the big deal is we need a picture, and this is mainly lighting, but we need a picture of the nameplate for each LED model number that was installed. And so, it's a lot easier for you to do it during your install as you're pulling them out of the box to get us the pictures and to then submit that with your project than the way we used to do it, which is you'd have to have a lift or a ladder at the inspection and would have to go up and shoot the nameplate that many times is in the fixture or on top of the fixture. And so, again, I feel like that's helped our post-inspection process to be easier, to where we can come out and just verify counts and some of the other things we need to verify because you've already provided us good pictures of the fixtures you installed and the model numbers. Next slide, please. And so this is more, for your service provider, we need the inspection contact day list to be, someone who's familiar with the project, preferably the person who did the audit. On lighting projects, we need it to be audited room by room. And, many times if it's someone who's never been to the site, they're not much help. And, then, we're not able to agree on certain things or pay on certain things if there's not someone there who can tell us, answer our questions. So it's just a lot easier that the contact is someone from the provider and that's very familiar with the project or the person who's done the audit on the project. Next slide. And so this is some of the stuff that's always been required at inspections that the service provider is responsible for, to prove what they have, what they've submitted to us when we come out for an inspection. A lot of this goes away, the lifts and ladders requirements. A lot of that'll go away if you've provided good photos, because we can say, okay, they've given us good photos. We agree that looks like the lights they have and the wattages. And so again, the inspection process goes a lot quicker. So these are more just guidelines for what's needed. But again, if you provide good photos, a lot of this goes away. Next slide. And this is, again, more for the service provider, maps and drawings. It's not a requirement, but it's strongly recommended on projects that, a large office building or a school that have lots of rooms. When we get out there for the inspection, if you've got hallway listed as hallway A, that's fine to list it like that. It's just that you're the only one who knows what hallway A is. And so hopefully you've got a map, and you can, if we select that line to look at during the inspection, you can look at your map and say, oh yeah, that's over here, and show us exactly where that is. And so, again, this is more just guidance on being successful. Next slide. And so outdoor lighting, a lot of what we see is outdoor lighting on poles and wall packs and things like that. And we've got certain, during the inspection, we need to count the number of fixtures that are not working. If there's more than 10%, it starts to take away a little bit of the incentive we're allowed to pay. So that's something that you're responsible on the inspection, or I say it's actually your service provider is responsible to show us that during the inspection. And so that includes if there's photocells or timers that need to be bypassed to turn the lights on, we need them to be prepared to do that when we come out there. And again, when we look at the project, it's the existing conditions of the site that we have to capture and go with. Next slide, please. And so again, building type's important because the way we pay our incentives, if a hospital operates a lot more hours than a warehouse does in most cases. And so the way we're allowed to pay based on building type, we have to be accurate because when we get audited, that's one of the things they look at. And so if if you turn it in as a hospital, you're going to get more money. But if it's really a warehouse and we don't catch that, then, when we get audited, that'd be something that we would have paid way too much money and would be liable for. So that's something we're looking at and we need to be correct. We've got a lot of different building types to choose from. And so this is just more some guidance on how to set your project up. It's mainly targeted towards lighting, but building type applies to pretty much every measure that you would be submitting. Next slide, please. This is just an example of like a light fixture, the LED nameplate. So the bottom picture that's the model number on the fixture, and so every LED has to be qualified. The rules that we have to follow are that the LED fixtures have to be qualified either by Design Lights Consortium or Energy Star, and so or else we're not allowed to pay on it. And so this is an example of someone providing a picture of the model number on their nameplate and then the DLC screenshot that represents that model number. And so we have to pay based on the wattage that the DLC has qualified that picture as. So this is just an example of what that would look like. Next slide, please. Non-qualifying LEDs we're not allowed to play on plug load or track lighting. And some of the other things you see here for tube LEDs, the only ones we're allowed to pay on would be the Type C that have a driver, an external driver. And so again, the model number will have to be qualified on that DLC or Energy Star website, once we do the post inspection, or else we're not able to pay on that. So we always try and encourage everyone to try and get that figured out up front. Make sure you're using a qualified LED, before we do the pre-inspection, and reserve the funds, because the last thing we want is to get out there for the post inspection and realize that you've installed something that we can't pay on. So it's in your interest and our interest to make sure that before the project starts that you're using something we can pay on. And as long as it's qualified, the model number is qualified on the DLC or the Energy Star website, then you're fine. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is just another, it must be qualified by DLC or Energy Star. Next slide. And so for air conditioning units, we go off of the AHRI certification. So, it's going to have the model number, which needs to match, what's on your unit. And then that model number on the AHRI certificate will have a cooling capacity and a efficiency, full load and part load. And so that's what we're looking at in the way we pay the projects. And that goes for chillers and VRF and geothermal as well. Next slide. And this is the program manager information. So I encourage you to take a picture of this or to refer back to the slide if you need to. Matt Taylor is the one who runs that Energy Concierge program. So he'd be the one you'd want to contact about the new program, where Leidos has been selected, and they'd be able to holistically look at your building and maybe identify some things that would be eligible for the grant and the incentives. Ron Hoskovic runs the midstream distributor program that's run by ICF. And so that's where all air conditioning and heat pumps will go this year. And so if you have specific questions, Ron will be able to answer or get you, to the right person at ICF to help you. And then all three of them are program managers for our commercial program, for the lighting and everything else that's commercial. So any of them would be able to answer questions. And that's it.
Great, Graham. Thank you so much. I will shoot an email as well after the session, maybe tomorrow or Monday, with all the contact information, so that just in case if you didn't get it. Now I can send that over to you as well, with their names, email, and telephone number as well. Thank you so much, Graham. Some great information, 21 versus 22. So excited for buildings to take advantage of this as well. I'm going to introduce Dub from the Texas PACE Authority, and he's going to talk a little bit about working all of these incentives and programs into PACE financing as well. So Dub, why don't we get started?
Great. Thanks, Salima. Yeah, continuing the theme of building energy efficiency here and some tools available to help facilitate these projects. I'm going to go ahead into the next slide. Yeah, this is me. Good morning. Background, both public and private sector, commercial real estate originally, and then the past 20 years running a state office that did energy efficiency engineering, consulting, and project financing for public facilities. So a little bit of a background in public and private project implementation. Next slide. And that really feeds into this role I have now with the Texas PACE Authority. The Texas PACE Authority is a nonprofit organization. We work for cities and counties, now 71 cities and counties across the state, to operate PACE programs for them. This is really a governmental function. We support them. It's kind of an outsourced service to allow them to offer PACE within their jurisdictions. And PACE projects, we'll get into this in a second, really these are otherwise private transactions between a private property owner, a private lender, and private service providers that would put a scope of project, put a financing package together and execute that project. With PACE, it is secured through a governmental assessment, which provides for longer term financing so that the savings from the project matches the costs over time. Next slide. And the problem, just kind of a review for those of you unfamiliar with PACE, that it was designed to help address, is that business and property owners know that by making these investments in energy and water upgrades, you can save money immediately and over the long term, but it is a long-term payback. And even smaller upgrades can be costly, and with competing priorities and budgets, oftentimes these never rise to the top. So the result for older buildings is that you have failing equipment that winds up being replaced on an emergency basis at a premium cost. Chillers go out usually not in December, they go out in July. And when you have to replace them like that, oftentimes the equipment available is maybe not what you would have specified, it's what's available, and you've got to get your building back into operation. So doing this on a piecemeal basis also results in kind of less than optimized building systems. Things aren't integrated, they aren't commissioned together, and you have temperature, comfort issues, moisture issues in buildings that result from all this. And in a new construction project, a challenge that occurs also is that once budgets are put together, typically this value engineering process occurs, meaning that what is scoped is greater than what the budget can tolerate. And so you begin knocking things out. And MEP systems, high efficiency mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems, oftentimes are victims of value engineering because they're behind the walls. They're not the visible kind of amenity oriented costs of a project. And that then, kind of haunts these buildings for decades as they exist for, 20, 50, 70, 100 years. So these decisions made at the front end can impact things over the longer term. And again, all this results in higher operating costs, lower building performance, asset valuation and decline over time, lower productivity, and then indoor comfort challenges. So next slide. So a solution to this is PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy, is what PACE stands for. This is a financing tool that provides low cost, 100% funding for certain energy, water conservation, and distributed generation projects. As I mentioned earlier, this is private financing. The key is it's secured by a special governmental assessment that remains in place over the financing term or the useful life of the improvements. PACE is authorized under state law, Local Government Code, Chapter 399. And there it says that a city or county can establish a PACE region, generally aligned with its boundaries, excuse me, And the local government, there's a process to do this. As I mentioned, we now have 71 cities and counties across the state, including the city of Dallas, that has an active PACE program. It's voluntary and open market. That means that any eligible property owner can utilize the PACE structure. Any capital provider, lender can provide the financing. Any contractor can do the work. So there's no set list or prescribed set of entities that can participate. And as far as the eligible properties, essentially anything except single family residential or residential up to 4 units. So commercial, including nonprofit, multifamily, 5 units or more, or any sort of industrial, manufacturing, or agricultural facilities. Next slide. In the types of improvements that are eligible, the sort of first line captures it all. If the project reduces energy or water usage or generates energy on site, it's probably going to be eligible. And I made a note here, knowing that Graham and Oncor were going to speak as well. Generally, PACE projects, because these are efficiency upgrades, equipment optimization projects, they usually align with utility program incentive eligibility. So that means that you can combine these things. A PACE project is probably going to otherwise, qualify, and so that can be additional funding to help execute the project. And these are some examples: chillers, boilers, renewable energy systems. On the water side, a variety of things there as well. Not a exclusive list, but just a sample of the sorts of things that we would see in a PACE project. Next slide. One of the key qualifiers for PACE is that it meet a SIR. This is essentially a kind of an ROI calculation, but a savings to investment ratio. So the savings, total savings over the term of the loan, needs to be at least equal to the cost of the project over its term. And so for savings, we look at direct energy and water savings. So that's avoided cost projections, but also financial savings that are caused by the project. This essentially is cash to the owner. This can be tax credits, depreciation, a variety of things like that. So that can help on the savings side. And then the investment is the total cost of the project, including the financing. We want these to line up. So again, this is should be a budget neutral approach to implementing these projects. And again, utility incentives can be combined. In the example here, a simple calculation at the bottom, you've got a HVAC and lighting improvement project. The projected savings is $950,000 over a 20-year term. The investment cost is $1 million, so those are slightly out of alignment. However, this project qualifies for $50,000 in utility incentives, so that can bring the overall cost down to meet that SIR requirement. So we encourage you to definitely look for utility incentives if they're available, because they do generally align with PACE eligibility. Next slide. And so across the state, PACE is growing, started slow in 2015, as you can see on the bottom, and really has had this kind of hockey stick growth. 54 projects closed, totaling $190 million. A lot of energy and water and natural gas savings. We calculate emission reductions based on those energy savings. And about half the projects have involved energy efficiency, lighting, chillers, HVAC, building envelope optimization, controls. About a third were water conservation, and then the remainder were distributed generation, mostly rooftop solar. Next slide. So let's look at Dallas, and the next few slides were provided. Actually, last week we hosted a webinar, kind of a wrap up of 2021, and Wayne Emerson with the City of Dallas, who's our principal contact there, presented these slides on Dallas. So I want to make sure and credit him for those. So in Dallas, 8 projects total, $46 million, and considerable energy, water savings, and CO2 reductions associated with those. Next slide. And these are the projects. As you can see, they range from the smallest being $74,000 to the largest being $23 million. Really is determined by the needs of the property. A variety of things here: mixed use, retail, hospitality. Most recently, the 3 at the top, these were 2021 projects. The Preston Center, if you've been there, Northwest Highway and Preston Road, you've seen this building that closed just in December. New JW Marriott downtown, they've gone above code for their specifications for MEP systems, which qualified it for PACE. And then Redbird Mall, which is in the redevelopment process, also in 2021. So let's go on to the next one and we'll dive a bit deeper into some of these. One I didn't mention, and this was actually on the cover too, Continental Gin Building, which is Deep Ellum area just east of downtown. This is an excellent example of how a developer really took a number of different tools and pulled them together into their capital stack and financing approach for this building. An old historic building property, great potential, but it needed a lot of work. And as you can see from the PACE perspective, the things that were funded through PACE were new roofing, new insulation, reflective roofing, glazing, exterior wall insulation, mechanical HVAC upgrades, lighting and solar, high efficiency motors on elevators. And $5 million of the project was funded through PACE. This was a $37 million project overall. Other things that were combined, TIF grant, $3 million, a number of different equity tranches, and then other financing to sort of bring this all together. The spaghetti chart on the right kind of illustrates how the developer pulled all this together. But this is pretty common. We do see PACE used maybe as the only financing method for a project, but oftentimes it's combined with other sources, and that really makes a lot of sense to leverage those. Next slide. This is Redbird Mall. This is what it will look like, the rendering. It's not what it looks like today, but this is the vision, and it's underway now. This one again, the PACE component of this, 3.4 million, but a variety of other loans, tax credits, TIF, and grants to help get this project underway. So again, PACE is a part of the capital stack here, and helped cover the costs of a lot of the MEP upgrades that were necessary for this project. Next. This was one of the first, this may have been the first project that closed in Dallas, and the Butler Brothers building, you see City Hall to the right. This was a highly visible building in disrepair that was a great opportunity, great location. So here, a developer purchased the property and really did a gut rehab, turned it from kind of a warehouse into condos, apartments, and a hotel on one end. And their capital stack, I'd like to illustrate this. This is a great way to use PACE also. The blue column on the left is the way that they assembled their capital stack initially. So about $118 million, roughly $50 million in senior debt, EB5, 22 million in tax credits, equity 22.4 million. And then to close that gap, and this is typical, they secured or had a mezzanine loan with a term sheet of 15%. It's very expensive money. And so they were looking at alternatives and realized, a lot of the things we need to do, the HVAC, lighting, insulation, roofing, glazing, et cetera, these things qualify for PACE. The city of Dallas has a PACE program. So let's shift those costs over to a PACE loan. The PACE loan wound up being roughly 24 million. And at 6.13% versus 15%. This brought the average weighted cost of capital for the entire project down 20%. So again, PACE is a part of the overall project here, and a great use of PACE and combined with other funding sources. And next. Some resources we have available. Everything I've talked about is on our website. Program guide and technical standards. We do events and trainings, a number of case studies, including those I've shown you. And then service provider directory, similar to what Oncor talked about with service providers. We have a listing. It's informational. If you're an owner and you're looking, which engineer do I contact, which contractor, which lender, we have an informational listing on our website as well that can help get you started. And I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Deb. That was really great information, and you know, how these incentives can be rolled into PACE as well. So that's exciting. I want to introduce Jacob Steiner. He is one of our members, and he's from Smart Energy 360, and he's going to just take a couple of minutes to kind of give some takeaways from this session, and just talk about some afterthoughts for just a couple of minutes. So Jacob, are you on?
I am. Thank you all so much for that presentation. It was great. I had a couple follow-up thoughts that I wanted to add to the incentives. This is a very well attended event and annually, and I've had a couple experiences in this last year with respect to incentives and projects that I thought were worth sharing in context. These incentives, I want to try to find a little bit of humor. The concierge service that Oncor is offering, I kind of want to start there and realize that's a utility offering you a concierge service to give you free money towards projects. Now, that's pretty unbelievable. And in 5 years or 10 years, you're going to look back and laugh at that because it goes away. And I mean that kindly. What today is an incentive to do these projects, and companies and the COG and Oncor and PACE coming together to promote these, and we get a lot of attention. I just want to raise the awareness that these things go away and then there become penalties. And we had a large solar project, a 700 kW project out in California, Pacific Gas and Electric territory. We talk about Texas and California, and there's huge differences, primarily the cost of electricity. And the state was the utility was offering a net metering rate of about 29 cents. Well, when you look at a project of that size, your payback is about 2.5 to 3 years on $1.5 million project with storage, battery storage. And we presented it to this owner, and we never could get to the final person to look at it because they were so busy. It wasn't a no, it was, hey, we're buying so many properties, give us a minute, give us a minute. And we kept saying, listen, y'all, if you wait much longer, these deals go away. And the net metering rate went from 29 cents last year to 3 cents now. 3 cents. There is no project. The project is gone. They called us this week and said, hey, we're ready to do that project now. So, well, that project is no longer here. It's gone. If you'd have locked it in last year in December, like we were urgently telling you, and see, as contractors, we have to be careful that we're not too, quote, pushy, right? Because people don't want to be pushed around. But let me be a little pushy here. These incentives would go away. The concierge desks go away. And then it becomes a cold market where you start facing regulatory. Nobody likes to be forced to do stuff, right? Deregulation was very similar. There was originally a price to beat where there was a huge discount for early adopters. Once those discounts go away and these incentives dry up, and I did hear Graham mention something about certain incentives that had gone away with different providers because they've met their caps. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. Maybe that was Bailey with respect to the car manufacturers. I'm sorry. Talking about incentives for charging stations and things like that. I just want to raise the awareness for the sake of everybody that made it to this call to also raise the awareness in the industry. These things have a time stamp on them that goes away. They expire, they run out, they end. And then you end up being the late adopter. And there's no incentives for late adopters, there's penalties. But as early adopters and market movers, we're seeing these programs. I mean, it's free money. I've had offices in New York City, and you couldn't walk down the street and give away $1,000 because people were so suspicious. Literally, you couldn't. Here's $1,000. No, that's okay. I'm good. It's funny because the incentive systems, to some degree, are like that. And so I just want to raise the awareness that we're kind of fighting our own human nature to act sooner rather than later. But I wanted to raise some urgency there and some awareness of what's going on with respect to the incentives that we can look at right now for lighting. I wanted to add another point about the incentives programs that I believe Graham mentioned, and that is your provider, your contractor, whoever you work with, whether it's a lighting company or an integrator, the experienced ones and the reputable ones will guarantee rebates because they know how it works. And so when they lock a project in, they'll say, hey, listen, we're going to guarantee you these rebates. So when you are looking at these projects, I think Dub made a fantastic point about the fact that reactive efforts, and I think everybody on this call knows what I mean by reactive. It's an emergency, it's a flood, an air conditioner went down and it's July. That's a reactive problem. And with the equipment shortages, I mean, the new norm that everybody says, oh, delay, 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 back order, back order, back order. Parts can't get here, technology can't get here, and it's everywhere. It's cars, it's electronics, and air conditioning equipment is no different. And so if you plan these things out and you look at this from I'm going to have to do something different. I'm going to have to get out there and look at these projects and interact with reputable contractors that can educate. You can get together proactive strategies. The industry is set up to handle the business. The incentives are there. The service networks are there like never before. And with all the momentum that we're getting, I just think it's quite timely. And I sort of look forward to this session every year because it's a good time to kind of hit the reset button and relook at those annual goals and say, this is the year. This is the year we do it. Because next year, those incentives, it's very likely they'll be less or gone or not there or something that will change about it that will be less of an incentive. Because what they want is early adoption. They want market movers and early adopters to drive the marketplace. And so these projects that have been shelved, there's incentive systems, there's PACE, there's all sorts of different programs. So that was the kind of parting comment I wanted to share was I wanted to be respectfully a little bit pushy to look at these programs, to make the call to the concierge service, which is really pretty fantastic. I mean, that's like American Express Black Card service right there. Oncor's got the concierge, so there's just so many ways to move forward with these types of projects that may have been shelved for different reasons. And the time is really valuable to do it now. So I hope that's helpful. Luckily it's virtual, so nobody can throw any tomatoes at me for being too pushy. But so that was my concluding thought. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much, Jacob. I really do appreciate your afterthoughts and your takeaways from the session. It's always valuable coming from one of our members as well. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. I wanted to thank the speakers for taking the time and putting these slides together for us and taking the time to talk to us about these wonderful programs for 2022, incentives, and a financing option as well. So it's real exciting every year for us to put together this session. Always very appreciative of our members as well as all the support that we have from outside members as well, and the support of our community members that hopped on today and were able to talk a little bit more about this session. I think we may have